All right. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, buenas tardes. Hola. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's gathering. My name is Amalia Chamorro. I am the Director of Education Policy for Unidos US, which is a Latino civil rights organization. And it's just a privilege after 2 years of the pandemic or more to be able to gather in person in community with you all. And so, again, I just want to welcome everybody, whether you're joining us here in the room or virtually, thanks to technology, we're able to live stream this event. And we have a half day of content to not only share with you, but also engage with you all and to reflect with us on this very important topic on the future of assessment and accountability. It is my pleasure to have worked alongside the National Urban League for the past year. Our teams have come together to be able to set the table and invite partners and stakeholders in the education field to work with us as we look to unpack the meaning of assessments and accountability from the constituents' perspective. It was really important for us from the beginning to make sure that we heard from community voices, because often in policy, these are the voices that are often left out of those national conversations that impact their everyday lives. And so we heard from parents, from students, and educators about what their experiences were like in experiencing assessments and what accountability looked like for them in their school communities. We will also be sharing on the National Urban League website, and we'll also upload to the Unidos US website the materials that we will be sharing today, including a recording of today's events. And so just to share with you a little bit more about how this project came to be, about a year ago, we engaged in a partnership and really on this journey together to reimagine how best to measure and support student learning and development. Because as we know from the pandemic, our communities have had disproportionate impact, not only in their learning, but in their everyday lives that really affect their learning conditions. And we have seen the widening of opportunity gaps during that time. And academic recovery is going to be top of mind and a priority for all of us. Many of you who are joining us today have been part of this integral process with us to make sure that we engage with you all and that we really include the voices of everyone. And so we thank you for your time and partnership in this effort. And as advocates, again, it is our responsibility to lift up the voices and make sure that we are inclusive and that we are setting the table for everyone to share their perspectives. As you can see from the title of today's gathering, it is about broadening perspectives and stopping to listen, learn, and reflect and share. So you will be hearing today more about the focus groups and interviews that we conducted and that we held as part of this project. And again, I look forward to engaging with all of you. Please do come up to me as we have breaks and also during the reception. And now I would like to turn it over to Hal Smith, Senior Vice President for Education, Youth Development, and Health with National Urban League, to share some additional reflections with you.
Thank you, Amalia, and colleagues, thank you for joining today, those who are in the room and those who are on live stream. I want to also thank many of you who participated in this process, certainly our funders and other partners who helped make this possible. Quite literally, without you, this would not have happened. But I want to also provide a little bit more context as to why we did this and why we thought it was important now. For us, this was a but-for project. But for this project, would we have heard from these people? Honestly, in many cases, no. I think we as advocates have to own that it is not always possible to speak with everyone, but we tried to be as intentional as possible to bring on people who are important to this conversation, but who often are not consulted when we start talking about technical things like assessment and accountability. We wanted to broaden the conversation, to widen the aperture so that we had people understanding that accountability wasn't just something that the federal government and state departments of education were responsible for, but something all members of the community are responsible for. Those of you who've heard me speak have heard me say this a million times. Schools don't have communities, communities have schools. So if you start from that, then all of us are implicated in the success of young people, of children. And so accountability doesn't just mean punishing our way to something. It means people taking responsibility for better outcomes for children and young people. And that's where we wanted to start. Secondly, we wanted to disconnect this conversation completely from any conversation about reauthorization. Those of us who do that every day know that the reauthorization conversation is soon to come. Regardless of what we think is going to be in there and what kinds of things we'll fight over, that'll be phase two. We did not want any conversation, any feedback, any questions to be bound by what we thought was politically feasible or possible. What needs to happen was our guide. What kinds of questions do you have? Remove ourselves from any kind of conversation that was limiting, and limiting in a very specific way. We wanted to do what Wade Henderson, the great Wade Henderson, has talked about for years, and that is minimizing artificial distance, right? That we have things that we're bringing to the conversation, our organizational priorities, our own personal circumstance, but if we can minimize those and focus on what's most important, we'll be in a much better position. Thirdly, we did not speak with everyone, so we certainly did not hear from everyone. This is not meant to be exhaustive. This is a point in time with a very specific group of people. We made a decision very, very early on that we were going to ask people to speak to those that they thought the nation should hear from. Not just their own constituents and stakeholders, but there was someone who was top of mind when this question came up. We'd like you to talk with them. We aren't limiting in any way who you should speak with in a focus group, who you should interview, who you should include. We wanted to hear from as many different kinds of stakeholders as possible, and we think we did a very good job in getting a wide range of voices in. For those that did join us on the project, we thank you for that, but one thing we promised was anonymity. We will not reveal who spoke with us. They are free to do so and should if they feel that they want to, but we will never reveal who we spoke with. We'll say educator, school board member, young person, but we are not into identifiers, and we did not want this to be in any way a gotcha moment. This was not the purpose, to find someone a year from now and said, in that focus group you said you were open to. No, we're not doing that. We knew we were not going to get final answers. We're asking people to work their way through this. So we focused on get better and better questions. How do we get people to think about this differently? What kinds of things are appropriate guardrails? What are the right indicators? All of these questions are critical to us, and we want to understand not only areas of agreement, but the real contours of the disagreement and where there are open questions. Open questions, better and better questions were our drivers. Importantly, unlike many of the things that we do, and unlike what we will be doing in phase two, we did not ask anyone to sign on to anything. This is simply a listening, an examination of what we heard. You'll hear our researchers, you'll hear our steering committee talk about what they heard and the questions that rose for them, but this is not about we're asking everyone to sign on to our principles. That's coming. That's not today. Lastly, we see this as the marker for our phase of the work, this phase of the work, the initial phase. Phase one ends September 13th, 2022. Tomorrow morning when we wake up, we move to the next phase. And we're going to rely on many of you not only to hold us accountable, but to be in that process yourselves, to bring your organizations, to bring your thinking, to bring your constituents to bear as we shape the future of assessment and accountability. I now have the privilege of handing this off to Dax Devlin Ross. Dax will serve as our moderator for today, but is also one of our key informants and key partners in this project. He is a principal at the social impact consultancies, Dax Dev and Third Settlements, both of which focus on designing disruptive strategies to generate equity in workplaces and education spaces alike. So with that, Dax Devlin Ross.
Sir, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, boy. Thank you. I don't know if I need the clicker yet, but whatever. So I'm going to just do a quick couple of opening remarks. It's great to see all of you all. This is my first time in this space since right before the pandemic. I was here in November 2019, so coming back in here yesterday was really it was a moment. I wanted to start by thanking Hal and Amalia just for caring about and guiding us through this work. I want to send some special thank yous as well to some people who probably will not ask for it and will not let themselves be seen, but nevertheless need to be acknowledged. That is, these are the folks who have been working behind the scenes, guiding us, supporting us. That's Adenika Huggins, Roxana Garza, Nina Riley, who I don't think is here, Simone Jones-Tyner, and Horatio Blackman. These are folks who just have been tirelessly working behind the scenes and need to know they don't ask for credit. They don't ask for credit, but they deserve credit. I want to thank you all, just the presenters and the panelists who are going to be here and giving them their time. I thank you in advance for being here. Really appreciate the wisdom and the insight that you're going to be offering us today. Those of you who are here in person and all of those who are joining us via live stream, thank you. I mean, we're going to be, especially for the folks who are here via live stream, want to make sure you know that we're intentional about including you in this experience. So while there, of course, is a predisposition to focus on who's in the room, and we will give you attention, we also want to make sure folks who are on the live stream, if you have questions, we're tracking those, we're collecting those, and they'll be filtering into the Q&A sections that are to follow. So that's just really important. I want to acknowledge the land that we're on right now. I want to acknowledge the land. I think it's important that we recognize that we're inhabiting, ancient territory, the Lenape people, and just to recognize that those folks are still amongst us, and that their stories are not forgotten, and that the land that we are privileged to occupy is as the result, to some extent, of harms that have been done and not fully been addressed and resolved. So I just wanted to put that out there. I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of privilege in this room, that we could be here, that we could get on planes, get on trains, and stay in a hotel and do all these things. And that's important to acknowledge as we kind of start this conversation, because Hal has already acknowledged and noted that there are people who are not in this space with us, but we want to make sure their voices are called into this space, their experiences, and you're going to hear a lot from them today. So I want to offer that today is really personal for me. I began my, albeit very brief teaching career in East New York. I later taught in the Lower East Side, Upper West Side. I coached basketball teams. I ran after-school programs in all the boroughs. So I feel a sense of responsibility to bring my past selves and all the young folks that I had a chance to interact with all of those years into this space and into this work. I'm also a parent of two very small children, one of whom started pre-K3 last week. And just the experience of watching her go into the school building was both exciting, but just unnerving. It's unnerving. You know what it feels like for those of you who are parents, just to I gotta walk away now and just trust and believe that things are gonna be all right in this space. And so part of the work we're doing personally is about my children too. A couple things I wanna just wrap up with. So my hope is that really that you all find what's personal in this conversation for you today, what's at stake for you in this conversation today, and you bring it into the energy in this room and make sure that the energy in this room feels that you're bringing that. So usually when I open up a space like this or start a session, I spend some time with what we call ways of being or community agreements. I think that's really important because we all come from different lived experiences. And if we don't get clear about a couple of things, we can get lost. It may be the case that somebody says something that might trigger me, or I might feel like it's not in alignment with my values and beliefs. And if we haven't established some things that we're going to have in common and hold in common, that can get in the way of us doing the work that we need to do. And in lieu of really going through all the ways of being that I would typically go through with the group, I just want to offer 3 for us that we can maybe hold for today. The first of it is let's just be present. Let's just be present. I know we got things happening, emails coming through, texts coming through, things on our mind, but we are just asking you to be here for this half of a day and be emotionally, intellectually, and physically present to the extent that you can. So that's the first ask. Let's be curious together. right? Because if there's something that's presented, as I already said, that maybe is counter to how we understand the world, or maybe just reaffirms what we already know, if we find ourselves rushing to judgment, let's just pause and be curious about that. Ask the question. Ask the question on the mic. Ask the question of your neighbors. Ask the question of yourself. But just be in that curious state. And then thirdly and finally, I just want to reiterate what Hal's already indicated. Let's accept that this is an ongoing process. Accept that this is ongoing work. I mean, this isn't about solving or fixing today. It's about sifting and sorting and exchanging. So what we're presenting, and I'm part of the presentation team as well, doing double duty, is a work in progress. It is a work in progress. It's a point in time, as already been stated. So just be generous in that regard. Be kind and be sort of gentle in understanding that we have done the best we can do to make sure that you all have some really thorough data to react to and to be in conversation with us about. So with that, we're going to get started. We have a full agenda, so you already know. And we have an amazing production team that's going to make sure we are guiding ourselves through this at a steady clip, but also at the same time making sure that there's opportunities for pausing, for discussion, and for reflection. So we're not going to just rush through things, but we are going to move through things. We do have a formal break at or about 2:40, so just get yourself ready for that. I know on your agenda it doesn't say what time the break is. I'm telling you right now, it's at 2:40. At which point we will get you 20 minutes, and then we're going to get back in here, and then we're going to get back to work, because we are here to work. Because we have the privilege of being here, we're going to work when we're here, all right? And if, in the meantime, whatever you need to take care of, whatever needs you have, you know where the restrooms are, you know where everything else is, take care of yourself. And with that, we're going to open with a brief video. And this video, it's the first of a series that will be available online in the coming days and coming weeks. But it's a video that starts to capture some of the voices and some of the sentiments that were gathered in the research process. So sit back, relax. You'll hear from me many more times today. But again, thank you for being here.
For the last 20 years, academic achievement gaps and learning opportunities have remained stagnant for Black and brown students. While there are many contributing factors, we'd like to share 2 key findings from K-12 and college admissions about the validity and reliability of standardized tests, with commentary from those most impacted, including students, educators, and education advocates.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? We're here to talk about the future of education focusing on standardized testing, share important research findings, and hear your thoughts as the people whose experience is shaped by this topic. I want to lead with this question. If the K-12 system were to move away from standardized testing, in your view, what would be gained, what would be lost?
I think what would be gained is it would allow us to see the student as an individual, not just a test score, which personally I really love. However, what would be lost is that consistency and easy way to complete admissions. But also, how do we prepare academic units to be able to teach these students and move them successfully through the pipeline?
That's a really great question, and something for us all to think about.
I think those of us, the states that have mature assessment systems, my primary worry is losing it. I don't want to lose that scale. I don't want to lose all of that knowledge that's built into the system now.
Knowledge and scale would be big things to lose. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Bobby Kennedy said back in 1965 that we needed to have an annual assessment as part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And he said that we need to have an annual assessment because if we don't, these racist superintendents are going to keep on doing what they do, which is deny Black children education. The assessment does provide a level of transparency. I think there's a scenario in which it gets utilized to do good things.
I think the norm reference scale center white dominant culture by design. We haven't talked about that too much. I really wanted the field to push away from comparing Jill and Johnny. and push more towards comparing learning to proficiency level descriptors. Like if you're level 1, look at level 2.
These are all important points. Thank you. So, there is evidence to support claims that standardized test scores are impacted by students' life experiences and their knowledge of test-taking techniques.
I'm reminded of when we're giving statewide standardized tests when you talk about equity, and test validity and reliability. But we would have questions that would reference certain things, like going to the lake, or going to a park, or having a particular experience. What our teachers would report back to us was, our students have never done that, or haven't been exposed to that. It was very difficult for them to read that story, or to respond to that particular question.
Some of our brightest students are really bright and can get everyday application of education. But when you sit down for 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours, sometimes they're taking multiple sections of the test throughout an 8-hour day. What we tell them is that your intellect boils down to whether you're a good test taker, right?
That brings us to our second research finding. Students' anxiety impacts their test scores, and students often report test anxiety before their exams. There's a racial and gender component to this as well. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
It's not really the only means to grade someone, because someone with stage fright, that might be really hard for the person in a test situation. The person may have the knowledge or really understand what was taught, but just because of that frightened tension, it might be difficult.
Right on. What you think matters, and you matter. What you just shared will help us better shape your future.
I feel like the standardized testing has its place, but I feel like there's too much placed on that alone. It needs to be a culmination of multiple things, not just one test. And then on top of that, there needs to be, I feel like the people who are on the team to put forth the test again, all those who put it together and need to have some kind of background, feel like sometimes it comes from one side at one place. And you can tell because the answers are so rigid. And that's not how life really works, right? None of us live in a rigid world where everything is the same. So I just think that the experience as a whole needs to be more real world.
Wow, this has been a riveting discussion. As we reimagine how the future of standardized testing looks, I know it will be shaped by your voices and the data that emerges as we continue to look closer at this very important topic. So thank you all for being here. The conversation continues.
Paving the road toward an equitable education for all is happening now, as civil rights leaders, educators, families, students, and policymakers call for change by realizing that the change should happen with us, not to us.
That was my first time seeing the video as well. It was really good. It was amazing. Congratulations on just getting that one together. And I know there's more to come, so we have more of those some more illuminating videos that kind of help tell the story. But in the meantime, we have some research findings to share with you today. Before we jump into that, I want to just reiterate a couple of the call to action bullet points that were already sort of stated, but I think can nevertheless be restated. We recognize that there's an assessment regime right now that is not adequately meeting the needs of historically marginalized students, particularly Black and brown young folks. So that's just a thing that is a call to action that we want to bring into the room and make sure that that's very clear about how the research was grounded in and of itself. Recognizing further that the accountability systems that we currently have in place, they're not leading to the improvements that folks hope to see, believe we are entitled to see, and that obviously young folks, we want to make young folks are seeing and experiencing. And third, there's a conversation happening, and a lot of us aren't in it, But there's a conversation happening that is specifically taking place in the education sector for those who might be involved in the formal education space. So there's a real need to ensure that this civil rights community, the education equity folks, are informing that conversation, which is why NUL and UNIDOS came together to bring their voices and amplify their voices in this space. So there's some commitments that have been outstanding, that were already outlined in the concept paper that sort of brought ourselves together, brought our team together, brought the Insight team. You're going to be meeting those in a moment. There was just a recognition that there's a commitment to ensuring that there's a representation, that it's going to be broad. There's a commitment to promoting a real disaggregation of data, and you'll hear us talk a bit about this more later on in our conversations. Bringing some more coherence and alignment. You'll hear us talk about emerging areas of agreement today. That emerging word is very critical. The idea that we're trying to find places where we have agreement ground is really critical to what we've done in our research. And then just recognizing there's some innovations that either have not been fully heard or not been fully given a space to be developed. And we want to make sure that this is a space and this is a community that's making sure those are being uplifted. And finally, there are some disagreements. And as we get deeper, we're going to find out where some of those live. And actually, I wouldn't necessarily characterize those as disagreements necessarily that came up in the video, but you saw different points of view. And we want to make sure that those don't get just washed over as we try to move towards the thing that we want to build in the future. So those are a little bit of the call to action pieces that are going to frame what's going to happen next. And then what we want to just offer is just that there's some actions that have already happened. So in 2021, there have been some convenings that have taken place with officials in the Department of Education and at the White House. So that's happened. And so part of the getting the folks in the room, that took place, but then there was a need and has a need that's been taking place over the spring and summer of this year in getting additional voices in the room. So initially, you're going to hear from West at Insight, and then you're going to be hearing from DACSTEF, my team. We're going to be presenting a little bit of our data. You're going to be hearing data that's both really abroad across all the focus groups that are inclusive of young people, educators, practitioners, experts. And then you're going to hear a bit more from us that have been, it's what's been bubbling up from our sort of closed door sense-making sessions that we've been holding with some key leaders in the civil rights space, folks who represent a number of organizations. So with that, we're going to get it going.